The HOA demolished my bridge without warning, so I took them to court and got their president removed. They claimed my land was part of their extended neighborhood, trespassed without permission, and tore down a bridge that stood for decades. But I documented everything, exposed their lies in court, and proved they had no authority over my farm. The judge ruled in my favor, fined their president personally, and forced the HOA to pay full restitution. Now the bridge stands taller than ever, and so do I. After spending most of his adult life buried in blueprints and deadlines as a mechanical engineer, I was more than ready to trade the city noise for silence. I bought the farm a year after I retired. Not just any farm, but 50 acres of rolling hills, dense woods, and a winding creek that cut through the middle like something out of a painting. It wasn't just a property to me. It was peace, purpose, and a place where I could finally breathe. Every morning, I'd take the same route, boots crunching on the dirt trails I carved out myself, checking fences, admiring the stillness, and letting the air clear my thoughts. My favorite part of the walk always led me to the old wooden bridge near the creek, which had stood solid for decades, long before I got there. It connected the front half of the land to the back pasture, where I planned to raise goats come spring. That bridge wasn't just functional, it was a part of the soul of the land. Built solid, weathered but strong, it had character. I never imagined it'd become the center of a battle I didn't ask for. It was one of those crisp fall mornings, the kind that wakes you up better than coffee, when I saw them. Two guys in orange vests on the far side of the creek, standing near the bridge. They had surveying equipment and looked like they were pretending to be busy, glancing around like they were checking something off a list. I stopped what I was doing, mending a section of the fence, and called out to them. "Can I help you with something?" The younger one, probably mid-20s, looked caught off guard like he didn't expect anyone to actually question him. He awkwardly adjusted his clipboard and tried to smile. Just doing an inspection," he said, glancing at the older guy next to him, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sent by the Homeowners Association." That made me pause. "Homeowners Association?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "What association would that be?" The kid checked his clipboard like the answer might have changed. Maple Grove? That's this area, right?" I let out a slow breath, trying to keep the irritation from bubbling over. "No, this is privately owned land. Not part of any homeowners association. You're on my farm." The older one finally decided to speak, his tone hard like concrete. "The address matches what we were given. If there's an issue, you'll need to talk to the HOA president." I took a step forward, arms crossed. "There is an issue. You're on land that doesn't belong to you, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave." The young guy muttered something like "sorry" and started backing away, but the older man lingered a few seconds longer, scanning the property with a look that didn't sit right with me. Eventually, he turned and walked back toward their truck, parked just outside my property line. As I watched them leave, a heavy feeling settled in my chest. I'd heard about HOAs in nearby developments pulling stunts like this. Fine you for the wrong paint color, threaten lawsuits over mailbox designs, but I never imagined they'd wander this far off their leash. My land wasn't even in town limits. No sidewalks, no streetlights, no reason to be confused about where you were. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Just some confused clipboard warriors who punched in the wrong address. I pushed the frustration down and got back to the fence. But something about that encounter kept gnawing at the back of my mind, like a quiet warning I hadn't learned to listen to yet. 2 days later, I got back from town with the truck loaded up, bags of feed, propane refills, and a few odds and ends to get ready for the winter. I was halfway down my gravel driveway when something caught my eye, and I felt my stomach drop. At first, I couldn't quite place it. The view near the creek looked off. I parked the truck and walked toward the bridge, my boots kicking up dust, each step heavier than the last. But when I got close enough, there was no mistaking it. The bridge was gone. Not damaged. Not under repair. Gone. All that was left was a mess, splintered wood, broken planks, and a handful of rusty nails tossed in a careless pile on the far side of the creek. The water, swollen from the week's rain, flowed freely where the supports used to stand. I just stood there for a minute, trying to process what the hell I was looking at. That bridge had stood for decades. Who would tear it down and why? Then I saw it. A wooden stake driven into the ground, and nailed to it was a folded piece of paper flapping in the wind like it had something to say. My hands were shaking when I pulled it off and read the printed text. Notice of removal. Per the Maple Grove Homeowners Association bylaws, unauthorized structures that pose a potential hazard to the community have been removed. If you have any questions, please contact the Homeowners Association office. I don't remember the last time I felt that kind of anger. It was the kind that makes your face go hot and your chest tighten like a vice. I crumpled the paper in my fist, got in the truck, and floored it toward Maple Grove. Their office was tucked into a bland strip mall just outside the development, one of those cookie-cutter places with nail salons, frozen yogurt, and the kind of signage that screams, "We care," but means the opposite. I barely parked before I was out of the cab, gravel flying under my tires. Inside, the place was pristine in that creepy, over-sanitized way. Walls lined with motivational posters, fake plants in every corner, and a receptionist behind the desk with a robotic smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" she chirped. I kept my tone tight. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge. Now." Her smile faltered just enough to notice, and she picked up the phone without another word. "Miss Hastings will see you," she said, gesturing to a hallway. I didn't wait. I walked straight down and pushed open the door at the end, finding myself face-to-face with the woman I'd only heard about by name, Karen Hastings, president of the Maple Grove HOA. She was exactly what I expected. Impeccably dressed, hair too perfect to be real, posture like she was about to sit for a portrait. She looked up from her desk with that thin, practiced smile I imagined she used when she was about to ruin someone's week. "Mr. Marshall, I presume," she said, her voice sharp and cold like she'd just bit into a lemon. "What can I do for you?" I slammed the crumpled notice onto her desk. "You can explain why you had my bridge torn down. And while you're at it, tell me why your people were even on my property in the first place." She didn't even blink. "Your bridge was a safety hazard. It didn't meet our standards." I stared at her, mouth open. "Your standards? I'm not part of your HOA. I don't live in Maple Grove. I own my land. This isn't your jurisdiction." She waved her hand like I was just being dramatic. "Your property borders the Maple Grove community. That makes it part of our extended neighborhood. We have a responsibility to maintain safety and visual harmony in the area." I leaned in, my voice low but shaking with fury. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You trespassed. You tore down my property. You had no right." Karen's eyes narrowed, her smile fading into something sharper. "We acted proactively. If someone got hurt, it would reflect poorly on the community. We had every right to intervene." I couldn't believe it. She was dead serious. No apology. No hesitation. Just smug confidence and twisted logic. "You're going to pay for that bridge," I said through gritted teeth. "And you're going to stay off my land." Karen tilted her head like I was some silly child who didn't know the rules. "You're welcome to take it up with the board, Mr. Marshall. Have a nice day." I left that office with my fist clenched so tight my knuckles ached. That woman didn't just cross a line, she burned it. And if she thought I was going to let it go, she didn't know me at all. This wasn't over. Not even close. The drive back to my farm felt longer than usual, and not just because of the traffic. My head was spinning, replaying every word out of Karen Hastings' mouth like a broken record. She spoke with the kind of entitlement that made your skin crawl, as if she truly believed she had some divine authority over anything within eyesight of Maple Grove's white picket fences. But I wasn't about to let her smug attitude or her fake bylaws scare me off. As soon as I got home, I poured myself a strong cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with one goal: prove without a shadow of a doubt that they had no legal leg to stand on. First call I made was to the county clerk's office. I explained the situation to the woman on the line, and she pulled up the maps and zoning records faster than I expected. "Sir," she said plainly, "your property is fully outside the municipal boundaries. It's not part of any subdivision, town council, or homeowners association. No legal authority connects your land to Maple Grove." That's all I needed to hear. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately dialed the number of someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Richard Halstead, the property attorney who helped me close on the farm when I first bought it. Richard answered on the third ring. His voice hadn't changed, calm, sharp, and always a few steps ahead. I gave him the whole rundown: the surprise surveyors, the bridge being torn down, the ridiculous letter nailed to a stake, and my encounter with Karen Hastings. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "They removed a structure from your property without your consent?" he asked, almost like he couldn't believe it. "And they're claiming it was within their rights because your land is adjacent to their development?" I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "That's exactly what they're saying." "Well, David," he said, This is about as clear-cut a case of trespassing and property damage as I've seen. They had no jurisdiction, no legal standing. You're not part of their HOA, and they sure as hell had no authority to touch anything on your land. I'll draft a cease and desist letter right away. It'll formally notify them to stay off your property, and we can begin building a case for damages. I let out a slow breath, the first real exhale of relief I'd felt since the bridge vanished. Good. I want them held responsible, Richard. They can't just do this to people. That's the plan, he said confidently, but he didn't sugarcoat the rest. I'll be straight with you. HOAs like this, especially ones run by someone like Karen Hastings, don't usually back down quietly. They'll stall, try to intimidate you, maybe even drag their feet in court. But the law's on your side, and that gives us the upper hand. Start documenting everything. Photos, emails, any letters or notes. And keep a record of everyone you spoke to. We'll need a full timeline. I spent the rest of the day just like that, taking pictures of the destruction by the creek from every possible angle, the way the planks lay busted up and scattered like forgotten trash. I wrote down everything I remembered about the two men in vests, the conversation with Karen, even the way her office smelled like fake lavender and control issues. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was focused. They picked the wrong guy to bulldoze. If Karen thought she could scare me off with her fake authority and corporate smile, she was about to learn what real resistance looked like. By the next morning, Richard had the cease and desist letter drafted and ready to go. He sent it by email and certified mail to the Maple Grove HOA office, leaving no room for excuses. The letter was direct and firm, outlined the trespassing, the illegal removal of private property, and made it crystal clear that any further action on their part would lead to a lawsuit. He also demanded that no HOA representative step foot on my land again. Once it was sent, we waited. Not long, though. 2 days later, Karen responded, of course she did, with an email so thick with passive aggression and legal fluff it could have passed for satire. She denied any wrongdoing, claimed the HOA had acted in good faith, and insisted the bridge was an imminent safety concern. Her tone dripped with superiority, as if she was doing me a favor by tearing it down. According to her, they had a civic duty to protect the aesthetic and physical safety of the greater neighborhood, and since my property impacted the visible cohesion of Maple Grove, they were within their responsibility to act. I read that email 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The arrogance practically bled through the screen. She still believed she had some sort of authority over my land just because her development sat nearby. That wasn't just wrong, it was delusional. I forwarded the email straight to Richard, who replied within the hour. "This works in our favor," he wrote. "She's doubling down. It shows intent and ignorance of legal boundaries. We'll use this." With that, he drafted a formal response, this time with legal threats spelled out clearly. Compensation for the damage. A warning of a lawsuit if the HOA so much as looked at my land again. And documentation of their illegal entry. While Richard handled the legal paperwork, I focused on building a rock-solid case. I started photographing everything all over again, the debris from the bridge, the nail holes in the ground where the stake had been driven in, the muddy tire tracks near the property line. I backed up every photo in 3 different places. I made detailed notes in a binder, timestamping everything I could remember. I printed out Karen's email, the original notice they left behind, and even pulled satellite images of the property to show how far removed I was from the nearest Maple Grove house. I wasn't leaving a single gap they could slither through. What surprised me was how quickly the story started to travel. I hadn't told many people about it, but one of my neighbors, an older guy named Bill who lived a few acres over, had stopped by while I was taking photos. I told him what happened, and his eyes got wide. "Karen Hastings?" he asked. "Oh, I've heard stories. She fined my cousin for having a flower pot that didn't match his shutters." The next day, Bill posted a summary of what I told him on a local online forum. I didn't think much of it at the time, but within a week, it blew up. Dozens of people jumped into the thread, folks from nearby towns, rural homeowners, even some people inside Maple Grove, sharing stories about Karen and the HOA overstepping their bounds. Some were absurd. Fines for mailbox height, threats over wind chimes, letters about non-compliant lawn gnomes. It felt like I had unintentionally sparked something bigger than just a property dispute. I hadn't planned on becoming a voice for anyone else. All I wanted was my bridge back and my land left alone. But now it felt like I was part of something larger, something a lot of people had been silently putting up with for far too long. What started as a casual post on a neighborhood forum turned into a wildfire I never saw coming. Bill's summary of my run-in with the Maple Grove HOA picked up steam fast. First a few comments, then a few dozen, and within a couple of days, it was everywhere. People from nearby towns were chiming in, even folks who had moved out of Maple Grove years ago, all eager to share their own horror stories about Karen Hastings and her HOA crusade. It felt like someone had cracked the lid off a pressure cooker, and now everyone was finally letting it out. Some of the stories were borderline unbelievable. A woman in town said she'd been fined for having a welcome mat that didn't match her porch trim. Another guy got written up for leaving his garage door open too long. But more than the complaints, it was the tone that stood out. People were fed up. They weren't just annoyed. They were angry, tired of being micromanaged by a board that seemed more interested in playing dictator than maintaining a community. And now, hearing that the HOA had taken it upon themselves to trespass onto private, out-of-jurisdiction land to demolish someone's bridge, that was the last straw for a lot of folks. It didn't take long before messages started showing up in my inbox. Some were from neighbors I barely knew. Others were from total strangers in nearby counties. People offering advice, sharing contacts for attorneys, or just letting me know I wasn't alone. One guy offered to help rebuild the bridge for free. A couple from across the creek, who I'd only waved at in passing, dropped off a handmade sign that read, "Stand your ground." I nailed it to the old oak by the driveway the same day. That small gesture meant more than they probably realized. Then came the call I didn't expect. A local journalist named Rachel Whitaker reached out to me after seeing the forum post making rounds on social media. She said she'd been following the thread and wanted to do a story, not just about the bridge, but about the bigger issue. Homeowners associations that overstep, bully, and take the law into their own hands. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't looking for headlines or attention. I just wanted things set right. But Rachel was persuasive in that calm, empathetic way some reporters have. Your story could help people who've been through the same thing but felt like they didn't have a voice, she said. That gave me pause. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. So I agreed to meet her. She came out to the farm, walked the property with me, asked thoughtful questions, and listened. She saw the busted remains of the original bridge and the photos I'd taken of the damage. I told her about the HOA letter, the confrontation with Karen, and the legal steps Richard and I were taking. She asked how it felt to have something like that taken from me. I told her the truth. It felt like being robbed in broad daylight. Only the thief wore heels and called herself a president. A few days later, the article ran in the local paper in their online edition. The headline was simple but powerful. Homeowner Association tears down retiree's bridge without permission. A legal battle begins. It laid everything out clearly, from the illegal demolition to the overreach of Maple Grove's HOA, to Karen Hastings' history of flexing her authority beyond what was appropriate or even legal. The piece didn't just spotlight my case. It painted a larger picture of how these groups can spiral out of control when no one holds them accountable. The reaction was immediate. More support, more emails. Even a few local officials started paying attention. People thanked me for speaking out, for standing up, for not rolling over like so many had before. I hadn't planned to be a voice for anyone. I just wanted my damn bridge back. But now it felt like the whole community was standing behind me, and that changed everything. With the legal gears turning and the community behind me, I decided it was time to stop staring at the wreckage and start rebuilding. That bridge had been more than just wood and nails. It was a connection, a memory, and a part of the land story. And while Karen Hastings and her HOA might have thought they'd erased it, I wasn't about to let them have the final word. I called up a local carpenter named Travis, quiet guy, about my age, with rough hands and a reputation for doing things right the first time. When I explained what happened, he didn't hesitate. "I've never built a bridge with a middle finger in it," he said with a grin, "but we'll figure it out." Construction started the following week. The weather held steady, and every day that passed, the pile of busted planks was replaced with fresh timber, stronger supports, and bolts that could probably hold up a truck. I helped where I could, hauling, lifting, measuring, but more than anything, I just wanted to be part of putting it back. Every swing of the hammer, every board nailed into place, felt like reclaiming a piece of what had been stolen. I didn't realize how personal it had become until I found myself standing in the middle of the new frame one morning, staring at the creek below, and feeling something settle inside me. Like the land itself was starting to breathe again. The new bridge wasn't just a replacement, it was a statement. Taller, stronger, and reinforced in every way. Travis even carved a small inscription into one of the side rails when we were done. Built to stay. I didn't ask him to do that, but it brought a lump to my throat when I ran my hand over the smooth letters. It was subtle, quiet, but it said everything. Meanwhile, Karen Hastings hadn't slowed down a bit. If anything, the article had lit a fire under her ego. She released a public statement through the HOA website, full of cold, sanitized language about community standards and unfortunate misunderstandings. She claimed the HOA acted with community-wide interest at heart and accused me of escalating a non-issue for personal gain. It was laughable if it weren't so shameless. What kind of personal gain do you get from losing a bridge and spending thousands to rebuild it? But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to her loyalists, the handful of board members and residents still buying what she was selling. What she didn't realize, or maybe just refused to accept, was that the tide had already turned. People were watching now. The story wasn't going away, and every defensive word she spat out just made her look more out of touch. But I didn't waste my energy on her. Not anymore. I had something better to focus on, watching that bridge rise from the ruins, one beam at a time. It was more than wood, more than structure. It was proof that I wasn't backing down. That no matter how entitled someone felt, they didn't get to rewrite the boundaries of what was mine. By the time we stepped into the courthouse, the air had changed. This wasn't just a personal dispute anymore. It was public, messy, and a whole lot bigger than a torn-down bridge. Richard had spent weeks building the case like a craftsman, stacking every email, photo, document, and record like bricks in a wall. He was calm as ever, dressed in a charcoal suit and carrying a thick binder that might as well have been labeled Karen's worst nightmare. I sat beside him in the courtroom, trying to keep my hands still, watching as the room filled with familiar faces, neighbors, reporters, even a few Maple Grove residents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen arrived flanked by two attorneys, still perfectly put together, still wearing that pinched expression like she just smelled something unpleasant. She didn't look at me once. She sat upright, poised and confident, or at least pretending to be. But as the judge entered and the proceedings began, that veneer of control started to crack. Richard led with the facts. He laid it out step by step. My property boundaries, the legal proof that I wasn't part of the HOA, the cease and desist letter, the photos of the destroyed bridge, and, most damning of all, the paper trail Karen had so proudly left behind. Emails she'd sent to board members bragging about cleaning up the border properties, meeting minutes where she referred to my land as visual pollution, and internal notes where she clearly acknowledged the farm was outside Maple Grove's jurisdiction. Karen's lawyers tried to spin it. They argued that the HOA had reasonable concern for community safety and were well-intentioned in their actions. They tried to paint me as some stubborn old guy with a rickety bridge who refused to listen to reason. But the judge didn't buy it, not for a second. He leaned forward during the cross-examination and asked Karen directly, "Did you know this property wasn't under your HOA's authority?" She stammered, tried to dodge, and finally admitted she did, but claimed she did what was best for the neighborhood. That's when the tone in the room shifted. Her attorneys looked like they'd swallowed something sour, and a low murmur ran through the seats behind us. I took the stand after that, and I told the truth, how I found the bridge destroyed, how I felt seeing a part of my land torn out without warning, and how Karen treated me like I didn't have the right to stand up for myself. I didn't have to exaggerate a thing. The judge listened carefully, occasionally nodding, and I could feel the weight of it all landing where it needed to. By the end of the day, it was clear where the verdict was heading. The judge didn't mince words. He ruled in my favor without hesitation, ordered the HOA to pay full restitution for the bridge, additional damages for trespassing, and compensation for the emotional distress caused by the illegal demolition. And in a rare twist that stunned even Richard, the judge personally fined Karen Hastings for her role in orchestrating the entire thing, calling her actions willfully negligent and an abuse of authority. She sat there frozen, lips tight, hands gripping the edge of the table like she was holding on for dear life. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look her way. I just sat there, breathing in the moment. After all the anger, the stress, the sleepless nights wondering how far this would go, the truth had finally won. They didn't just tear down a bridge, they tried to bulldoze someone's rights. And they learned the hard way that not everyone rolls over. Walking out of that courtroom felt like shedding a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. The ruling was more than just a win, it was validation. The judge's decision didn't just acknowledge what Karen Hastings and the HOA had done, it exposed it. The order was clear: full compensation for the cost of rebuilding the bridge, damages for the trespassing, additional restitution for the emotional stress they caused, and on top of that, a personal fine slapped directly on Karen. I don't think she saw it coming. One minute she was sitting there like the queen of her little kingdom, and the next, she was being held accountable in front of the entire community she thought she ruled. News of the verdict traveled fast. The local paper ran another article before the ink on the judgment even dried, and this time the headline said it all. HOA president fined after illegally demolishing local farmer's bridge. Judge issues blistering ruling. Karen didn't even make it through the week. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, and it didn't take long before residents started demanding her resignation. For years, she'd held onto her position like a badge of honor, using it to push her own standards and punish anyone who didn't fall in line. But that power started to crumble once people saw her for what she really was. The meeting was standing room only, and by the end of it, Karen had no choice but to step down, disgraced, embarrassed, and no longer untouchable. With her gone, things started to shift. The remaining board members, maybe realizing how close they'd come to sinking the entire organization, began listening for once. They announced a full policy review, promising to rewrite the bylaws to clearly define HOA limits, prevent further overreach, and create transparency around decision-making. They even invited residents from outside Maple Grove to attend open meetings if they'd ever been affected by HOA actions. It was the kind of change no one thought would ever happen. But now, nobody wanted a repeat of the Karen era. As for me, I didn't show up to gloat or rub it in. I stayed on the farm, where I belonged, and let the results speak for themselves. The new bridge stood tall and solid, a quiet but powerful reminder of what it took to stand my ground. I hadn't gone looking for a fight, but once it came to my doorstep, I wasn't about to let someone like Karen Hastings rewrite the rules. Not on my land. Not in my life. What meant more than the court victory were the people, neighbors, farmers, even residents from inside Maple Grove, who started stopping by just to shake my hand, thank me, or share their own stories. Some of them had been quietly bullied for years. Others had given up trying to push back. But now, they saw what could happen when someone stood up and said, enough. The victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to every person who'd ever been told to stay quiet, keep their head down, and not make waves. Turns out, sometimes the waves are exactly what's needed to clear the way. In the weeks after the ruling, my life settled into something close to normal, but the ripple effects from the fight hadn't stopped. I thought things might quiet down, but it turns out when you take on a bully and win, word gets around. I started getting letters in the mail, emails from people I didn't know, even a few voicemails from folks in other states who'd read the story online. Most just wanted to say thank you for standing up, for not folding, for showing that people can fight back and win. A few were dealing with their own HOA nightmares and asked for advice. I always answered the same way. Start with the facts, document everything, and never let fear be the reason you stay quiet. It wasn't long before neighbors started showing up in person. Some brought small gifts, a loaf of bread, a jar of homemade jam, even a hand-carved sign that read, "My land, my rules." Others came just to talk. They'd sit with me on the porch, tell me about the fines, the threats, the letters they'd been too afraid to challenge. It was humbling, hearing how many people had been silently putting up with the same kind of overreach. I never thought of myself as a leader, still don't. But I guess when you take the first step, people start following your footprints without asking. That's when the meeting started. At first, it was just a few of us gathered at the local feed store after hours, sipping coffee and swapping stories. But word spread, and within a month, we had enough people to move it to the community center. Farmers, homeowners, small business owners, even a few folks from inside Maple Grove showed up wanting to learn how to protect themselves. I printed out templates for cease and desist letters, helped people understand their zoning maps, and shared everything I'd learned from dealing with Karen and her army of clipboard enforcers. It wasn't about revenge, it was about empowerment. The conversations weren't just about law and land, either. They were about dignity, about people reclaiming the right to live their lives without being micromanaged into submission. One guy stood up during a meeting and said, "I thought I was crazy for fighting this. Now I see I was just early." That hit me. That right there was why I kept showing up. I didn't want attention, and I definitely didn't want some kind of spotlight. But I started to see that leadership doesn't always mean giving speeches or wearing a title. Sometimes it's just being steady, being the person who says, "You're not alone." And no, you're not crazy. I kept running the farm, working the land, and walking that bridge every morning like I always had. But now, when I crossed it, I carried a little more than feed for the goats or tools for the fence. I carried stories, faces, and the quiet knowledge that what we fought for mattered. And that made every step feel a little stronger. Exactly 1 year to the day since I found my bridge torn down, I stood on its rebuilt frame, hands resting on the smooth wooden rail, watching the creek below slide gently over the rocks. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves had turned that familiar patchwork of gold and fire that always made this land feel like a painting come to life. The sun was just starting to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pasture, and everything around me was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't notice until you've lived through noise. I ran my hand along the grain of the wood, tracing the work Travis and I had done, remembering every board we laid and every bolt we tightened. It still stood strong, maybe stronger than before. But this bridge had become something more than I ever expected. It wasn't just a crossing anymore. It was a marker, a symbol of the fight I never planned for, the storm I never invited, and the line I refused to let anyone cross. It's funny how something so simple can come to mean so much. A year ago, that bridge was just part of the farm. Now, it carries the weight of perseverance, of standing tall when someone tries to shrink you down. I didn't win because I yelled the loudest. I won because I didn't bend. I held to what was mine, not out of spite, but out of principle. And somewhere along the way, that quiet determination helped others find their voices too. The farm looks the same, but I don't. Not really. I've come through something that tried to chip away at the very ground beneath me, and I'm still here. Maybe more rooted than ever. The goats are finally in the back pasture where they belong, the barn's been expanded, and the fence line is tighter than it's ever been. The land feels whole again, and so do I. As the sun slipped lower and the sky turned that soft amber hue that always made me pause, I looked across the fields and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was peaceful. Because I had held the line, and in doing so, found something I hadn't even known I'd lost: purpose. The bridge creaked gently under my boots as I turned to walk back toward the house, the last light dancing on the water behind me. The night would fall soon, but I wasn't worried. The land was quiet, the fight was over, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace.